like with the color font, it's just a font, yeah. And if you load a variable font, it should behave like a font from the user perspective. Otherwise, well, the basic use is if you would have to do a lot of things. However, it is a font that has a couple of properties that you normally find in separate fonts. And the properties can, for instance, be that the width is different, or the slope in italics can have a slope, or the weight can be a bit heavier than normal. So that means that where you normally in a text user interface will say something like boldface or slanted or whatever, you suddenly have to think in a font. You have to, if you choose an instant, you can have a regular upright shape, but it can have properties that you would normally find in, let's say, a boldface or whatever font. I'm not sure yet how I am going to support that. Technically, you could say I have one font and I create an instance that is bold. I create another instance that's italic and whatever. It's just like with font features. It's not always clear how you implement it in the text, basically macro user interface. The engine's view, well, it's actually not fundamentally different from another font. It just has different shapes and whatever. But because, as Adam also told, there are some subtle changes in the way the shapes are defined, you need to do something special in the engines. I will come back to that. At the viewer level, and actually that's interesting aspect, Adam showed the browser capability or something. You can forget about it if you talk about PDF, because I don't see Acrobat or whatever doing anything with it, because there's a specification issue, I guess. If you would have an instance, how would Acrobat, or basically the PDF format, know that you want to have this or that instance? That's something that is, I think, far from being standardized at this moment.
No, I think the agreement is that you have to sort of generate an instance when sending it to the print screen. And basically, so I sort of came up with this when talking before. Basically, it's like, you know, it's like molten, it's like hot typesetting. So variable fonts are basically like when you composed in linotype, the metal was liquid. Yeah. And at some point it had to freeze. Yeah. So basically this is the freezing.
Yeah. So
you have to freeze the
that's, I think, fundamental difference between PDF, which is basically also a frozen format, versus the dynamic one. I was actually surprised that it's so dynamic in the view. I would expect something like instances there too. So that's the viewer's view. And then there's the user's view. The user nowadays is already accustomed to open type, so in a sense it doesn't introduce revolutionary new things. It just introduces another axis of definition on which you operate. So to summarize, for text users, just like the color fonts, is just another font. Okay, the starting point. If at some point, I think Adam last year mentioned the variable fonts, just as something that was coming. So then you have something. Okay, let's keep an eye on that. And occasionally you keep an eye on the open type standard and see how it evolves. So at some point the 1.8 spec was up and it described these tables, and then you have the thing like, okay, should I look into it? No, there's no reason to look into it because there are no fonts. And then after a while some of these fonts show up, and then you can say, okay, now I can look into it. There's a little bit of descriptions here and there on the internet where you can find a little bit what it is about. But the biggest problem then is if you want to implement something and you read the spec, you know, it's not always clear what is meant there. So, and I'm not really good in you know, I'm not a mathematician. It's not if I see these shapes that I say, okay, I'm a trial and error guy. I have to play with it and understand it in order to be able to do something with it. That's the way I work. That's actually the whole way the context evolves. So, okay, you take a file, I have the font reader that we use in Lua is basically Lua code that interprets the binary information. We don't use the built-in font loader anymore. So I'm quite.
You are obscuring part of the screen.
Yeah, okay.
Just once.
It's more for myself than for you that is there. So the thing is that I am able to look into these fonts and read the tables and read all the information that I want. I'm not dependent on an engine or whatever to support something. And the other thing is, and I will show that too, is that we already had ways in context to look at the shapes in certain ways. So I could read in the right information and look what was happening there. And that for me is good enough to get going. The only condition that I impose on myself is that I'm not actually no longer willing to deal with crappy stuff. In the sense, if a font is not good, fine, forget about it, wait till the font is okay. Don't waste time on heuristics and on fixing things. Okay. So what was the first thing I did is okay, I'm able to load this font. Now let's just try to render the font. Well, to cut short this whole list of things, the biggest thing that you then run into is, and Adam pointed out, is the CFF and the TTF variant. That is that if you load a font with CFF2 shapes, basically Lua crashes because it's a completely different format. It's not the same, incompatible. Okay, but at some point you manage to get Lua working on it, and then Acrobat crashes because it cannot understand the format either. So then you realize, okay, there's a little bit more going on here than just different shapes. TrueType is slightly different. TrueType is more transparent. You can just load it, it will be viewed, whatever. This has to do with the fact that in TrueType shapes, the information is external to the shape, while in CFF, the information is internal to the shape. Okay. So at some point you have something visible, you see something, the machine doesn't crash anymore, and then you say, now we need to make sure that it also can do variations. And then the stuff becomes more hairy, because if you look at the spec, and I invite you to look at the OpenType spec and look at the variable font description, if you don't have a background in fonts, you have no clue what goes on there. There are some formulas there that describe how you need to do these linear transformations, and you really start wondering what's there. And then you find in the spec a description here and there, so wait a minute, here it says this, there it says that. And there are all kinds of fuzzy things like, you have to choose a value between the minimum and the maximum, but if you choose it outside the maximum, that is a signal for the machinery to ignore it. Okay, that's great, such kind of spec, like you enter something bad or wrong, and then it's supposed to be ignored, or zero, or whatever kind of, that kind of, this big if-then formula that is in the specification.
That formula will also be soon revised, because right now they're debating what to do in cases where there is the potential division by zero.
Oh.
It just has sort of come up. So on GitHub there are discussions about what to do if we're supposed to divide by zero. What should the result then be?
Yeah. Okay. So you imagine a bit that whatever I come up with and show probably has to be redone eventually. Well, probably not fundamentally, but to a large extent. It also means that if a lot of things work, as I will show, but if you take a new font, it can easily crash the whole machinery, because there are things like you assume that these tables are there, and the recommendation says these tables should be there, and they are not there. So, you get this kind of things like you expect a number, but it's zero, and then you get a division and whatever. You get this kind of effect because, everybody's still, I think, looking at how to deal with
the tools to create these tables weren't there like a month ago, so the spec for the tables were there, but there were no tools to make these tables. So
yes, the same happened with PDF in the beginning. When you when they had these files that are called handcrafted.pdf, yeah, and then you know a bit how late it is if you have to deal with that kind of things. Okay, so there are actually two fonts that are quite usable for testing. One is the Adobe variable font, which is actually where I think I'm not sure if it's really an Adobe font, but
it is.
Yeah?
It's Source Serif Pro. Source Serif Pro.
Derived from the source fonts.
Yes.
Okay. So it has several axes on which it operates. I'm not going into the details about axes or whatever. That is not my specialty. So what happens in a font like that is that there is a table that describes a set of more or less standard instances that you are supposed to provide. So for instance, a user interface can then offer you these from extra light to black variations. The numbers behind that is the width, the width and the weight. So you have this one of the axes runs from 0 to 1000 and the other from 0 to 100. And this already gives an idea about if you are a user, in what kind of terms you should think. It took a bit of experimenting and playing and wondering why everything was there before I realized that part of the standard and the tables had just to do with the fact that you were mapping these values, weight values that, for instance, are used in user interfaces, are mapped on the internal values. It's not nowhere written that way, but that's the way why it's there. Adam explained to me Microsoft needed that for their interface, so that's why the table is there, blah, blah, blah. You get that kind of things. So these are bit extremes that this font can take.
So these are the recommended values.
Yes, these are the
So
sort
I
of...
was just wondering why it's regular something like 394 instead of just plain 400.
No, I think a lot of thought went into this value.
Or both just plain 800.
This is Avenir Next, which is a sans serif. So there you see, here is a condensed axis. So again you see that it goes basically from light to bold, all these things. Okay. I now have to zoom in a little bit on some of the details. You already saw these things in Adam's talk. So what happens is, if you use these three instances, is that there are points defined where things basically that make the shape if you just go through them. But depending on the values of these, it's not even the axis that you operate on, it's more complex than that, it's a region model, whatever. That you can see that these things extend more or less into the stem. Yeah? If you go back in time, if you look at, this is one of the things that the Goose team had to deal with when they were looking at, they're going from, let's say, computer modern to letter modern. That is that also in Metafont you have these designs where they use overlap. And what you see here is this kind of overlap. Yeah? That's there, and it normally gets obscured when you fill it. Yeah? You don't see this overlap. But if you want to create an outline, then of course this overlap you can consider to be interfering. So one of the lessons that I learned from this is that these fonts are completely inadequate as outline fonts. You can only use them filled. And I think, for instance, the computer modern, your computer modern type ones you cannot use filled. They have the same problem as these fonts. The letter moderns are okay. You make sure you have the right shapes. So this is one thing. It's not so there are actually some limitations in this font in that sense. I'm not sure how I had to read in this.
The cutting plotter is not a solution.
not a solution.
Well, yes, so basically the thing is that one thing that I didn't mention is that yes, these overlaps are basically, sometimes they're just necessary for the interpolation because you may want to sort of hide certain things, and there can be 2 points that you have like an ink trap, but then in a boulder they just move in and you just get 1 point. But if you remove the overlap, then there will be 1 point versus 2 points. So these 2 points are sort of hidden inside the letter somehow. And lots of rasterizers, printers, actually, these overlaps were actually sort of permitted in the specifications for years, but lots of font engines had problems with them. So you would get holes, you would get the filling problems, or you would get these ghosts. So if composites were drawn on top of each other, there would be anti-aliases in separate runs, and you would get thin, white cutouts. But with the variable fonts, basically all these companies agreed that they need to fix it, because for variable fonts, these overlaps are really needed. And again, so part of the freezing, among others, will be, at least that's what the operating system manufacturers want to do, will be removing the overlap on the frozen fonts before they get sent to the PDF, to avoid facts that such a PDF will be printed on a printer that has this old buggy rasterizer that actually cuts out white portions where you have an overlap.
Yeah, because there's also this odd even thing, and I've read some discussion that they want to revision some of that. Okay, I think this is a bit of a moving target in that sense. So here you have the other one. You can see how these shapes.
I actually think it produces a rather nice effect.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just something you need to keep in mind if you think, oh, I make a nice outline font for this poster. It doesn't really work.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's unusable. It's just a different kind of outline.
It's unexpected. It may be unexpected.
Yeah.
If you
It can actually learn you a bit about how the technology works if you look at it.
Now, I want to ask, with the regular type 1 fonts, there was something called the even old fill, but here there's apparently not consistent. It's applied to the letter O, but not to all these over there.
Well, the thing is that I think normally in those fonts, if they were put on the market, they made sure that the shapes were in such a way that the odd even rule worked out right.
Yeah.
And here, you cannot do that because you are operating on these axes. So these things that are on the inside can get on the outside and things like that. It's a more...
Somewhere there must be a parameter that says what kind of fill should be applied.
If you consider it important, I think in practice it doesn't matter.
I think it's the direction of the curve, right? Yeah. The direction
Yes.
of the actual curve decides on the filling.
yes,
So in all one, the outside is so and the inside
Yes.
is, yeah.
yes.
Okay, so if you look at this, the font itself has information about the minimum and maximum values that you may operate upon. Now, if you talk about tech and techies always want to go outside the border, so there's of course a big danger that they start manipulating these fonts in a way that violate the specifications. So you can imagine that you go to such extremes that let's say these points like this get out on the other side, or that this one somehow becomes a bit weird too. But as long as you feel right. This is an example of here I've overlaid 3 slightly different variants. Yeah, you can see that sometimes things go close to others, sometimes things go up. But it can be all kinds of movements that you have. This is an interesting point here. Yeah. Okay, so how does it work in a tech situation? Well, in context you always define the features in an indirect way. So I define a font feature called the font shaped. It inherits all the default settings, and I specify on what axis I want to manipulate this font. So I set the width to 10, then I define the font and I get this result. Yeah, so this is a width of 10, here the width is 100 and the weight is 200. You get a different rendering. the thing is, again, it's not always trivial if you take this value, what comes out. It's not like you can predict. It's you know, I'll show a bit how you can figure it out, but it's not like, oh, I duplicate it, I take this value, I take the double, I double it, and then I get twice this or that. It doesn't work that way. It's not that linear. As Adam explained, some of these things suddenly can become 0, and then it doesn't play a role at all. So this is a bit how it works internally for those more interested in the dirty details. At some point in, I think Luigi will tell a bit more about that later when he has his hand of blue at home. The CFF file, if we start with CFF first, is a binary format that you have to decipher. It can have things like X, Y, R moves to, or it can be and a curve too. Now, the thing here is that these are not, this is, the first one is absolute value, and the others are deltas on the previous one. Now, in the CFF file, if you come from Metapose or whatever, basically Metapose or Metafont only has move to line 2, curve 2, that's about it. And you can make a font from that. Yeah? So all this kind of things with stems and all this stuff, and the special, what is it, HV curve 2, whatever kind of stuff, you don't really need it if you can take the simple model for looking at it. Okay, so what happens? You have this point, this X. This X can, in practice, as I show here, become X plus some factor times another X, another factor times another X, etc., etc. Now, I mentioned two X's, a width and a height, a width and a weight. So you say there are two X's, but it doesn't work that way. There can be, let's say, two X's and maybe 20 values that need to be manipulated. These values are organized in groups called regions. Don't ask me why they are called regions. It has nothing to do with a region. Yeah, my error is that, hey, where is this region? No, it's not a region like that. It's a kind of solution space or whatever kind of thing. Sort of abstract. You need a little bit of abstract thinking for that, which I completely lack. So what happens here? So at some point, the font machinery, the renderer, wants this value, an X, a Y, and an operator. And in the stream, you find things like this, an X, and then a blend operator. There's a number here, 4. So there are 4 factors that need to be manipulated. So you see an X is pushed on the stack, 4 values pushed on the stack, a blend operator. Oops, I have to apply something to this X value here. And that are these 4, in this case 4, but it can be 40 or 400 as well. So most of them, if you look in practice, are 0. They don't play a role. So it can be that you only manipulate one for instance, the weight. But it can be that if the font becomes too wide, that you want to compensate something else, and then suddenly one of the other ones can kick in. So there are all kinds of relationships between these things. Like in the CFF file, there are these intermediate things that need to be taken into account. There is a switch for taking another region specification, so you need to take that into account too. There can be something like 2 of these sets that you then need to apply to 2 numbers, things like that. Once you understand what happens, it's not too complex, but you need a little bit of my own trial and error to figure out what happens. Because you do this stepwise. You generate something, you play with the values, say, okay, this is what I mean. If you have a CFF file, so the TrueType thing, it's slightly different. In TrueType there are basically 2 big arrays with X and Y values. that are somehow, if you look at the font definition, the glyph table. And then there are all kinds of delta sets that need to be applied to those values. It's more complex. CFF is actually, in my opinion, much cleaner than the CFF thing.
So my understanding is that in CFF you just have one extra operator that is blend.
Yeah.
So once you implement this operator, you have the
You
entire
have
machine
yes,
to interpret that.
So you have the CFF tool. So basically, if you want to generate this font, you need to add these blend thingies, and you need to have a specification somewhere. And that is enough. The specification says, okay, if I choose these values, then these factors become, the S thingies become this or this or this. And then you're done. If you do a true type font, you have to create all kinds of additional tables and things like that for the shape to be done, which is a bit more complex. On the other hand, as Ellen pointed out, you can just load the font and it will work. That's the difference between, for this, it doesn't work out of the box.
Yes, so CFF2 is basically a new format.
It's a new format.
The TrueType based version is an extension of TrueType, so it adds this extra data in a different place.
Although I found out that if you don't apply the default, the result doesn't look, it looks like the font, I think Avenir or whatever, assumes that you apply the regular settings in order for it to look.
Oh yeah, that is even more.
Yes, so you get that also. But I will show a bit more data. Okay, so how is this implemented? Well, I extended the font reader to read additional tables. There's a little bit of complication there. There are some tables that are more or less advised to be there, they are not there. So that can be a bit of a problem. So I tested one font and it has extreme large X heights simply because the table was not adapted to provide the information needed for that. So that's one problem. The other is that TrueType fonts have information about the bounding box. It's in the table, and this is not true for the PostScript outlines. The font, basically, in this case, the font loader has to sort of pre-render the shape in order to get the dimensions. In that respect, I already had all that code, so implementing CFF was easy because I had that code. For CFF, you have to also calculate the bounding box of the adapted glyph. Now there's a problem there. I need to talk with Adam about it later. There is this talk about ghost points and all kinds of stuff which are not there or are there or whatever. Basically, the information to calculate the proper bounding box is lacking. The advice is that the table should be there to provide the information, but it's not mandated. I think it should be mandated. For renderers, in order for a renderer to operate nicely on this font, they have to make those tables that give the bounding box and width information mandated, period. Don't, otherwise you enter fuzzy areas with okay. You may wonder, does it have an impact on performance? No, it doesn't. In LoRTech, we just cache all the information. I generate the information needed for instance, then you have the font, and there's no performance impact. There is, of course, the issue of how do you deal with the CFF2 thing. Well, I have to convert the CFF2 into a CFF instance. So in the loop